Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing mavrincbor in a 15+2 game on lichess.org. Alright, you guys have been asking for it. It's a standard game, and my opponent is playing the Pirc defense d6 on move 1. I'll play the main line d4. And let's see if I can go for something aggressive in this video. So I just got back from a trip to New Orleans. I was down there for a few days. I was the guest of honor at a chess festival there, the New Orleans Chess Festival. And it was a great trip. Those two blindfold videos that I posted a couple days ago were both taken at the New Orleans Chess Festival. So here I'm going to play a3. This is a weird looking move. And I'll get into why I played this move a bit later in the video, but for now, let's just focus on my opponent's reply. So c6. All right, so this opens queen a5. I'm thinking about just knight f3 or bishop d3 here. The Cliff Notes version of a3 is that it discourages black from playing c5, which is a common resource for black in Pirc setups. So I think in this exact position, I'm probably going to opt for bishop d3, but also knight f3. Now, let's play knight f3 first. I'm just going to try to discourage black from pushing e5. Let's get one more attacker on that square. If black shoots that queen out to a5, which threatens knight takes e4, I think then I'll play bishop to d3. So this a3 move I first saw in an article in the magazine New in Chess about 10 years ago. And it's really funky. Like, the main move is knight f3 by a good margin. But a3 does discourage c5 because if black were to play that move, pawn takes, black often decides to play queen a5 thereafter, looking for knight takes e4 shots. And with a3 inserted, you can play b4 and kick that black queen back. So I'll demonstrate that line in the postmortem. So black just castles. Probably bishop d3 is the move here. I could also think about advancing e5, but let's just opt for simple development first. Gear up for e5 later. New Orleans is a fantastic city. It's not one of the cities that you think of when you think of the United States. You know, you think of New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, cities like that, but there's a ton of soul in New Orleans. It was my first time there, and I had a really great time. Ate some excellent food. Jambalaya, red beans and rice. What else did I have there? I had a po' boy sandwich, muffaletta sandwich. I was not lacking in good food. Okay, bishop g4. So this pins the knight. I can think about playing e5 or castles. I could also think about h3 if I wanted to kick the bishop. Maybe I should do that, just gain the bishop pair. Bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, and then look to play e5 after that. So if I play e5 now, d takes e5, f takes e5, knight d5 will probably be played. Not that that's bad for me, but I think I would like to get the bishop pair first. The only thing is, I wonder if black will end up playing bishop takes f3 even if I don't play h3. That's always the fear if you play this move, is that your opponent might capture on f3 anyways. So in effect, I'm forcing him to play a move that he would have played on his own volition. Still, though, it's such a standard move. Looking at e5 once more. e5, take, take, knight d5, maybe knight e4 in that case. If h3, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, queen b6, that attacks this pawn. I guess I can always play knight e2, however. That should be completely fine. Black might strike back with e5 in the center, though. Yeah, there are circumstances where black can play e5 even when it temporarily drops a pawn. They might just do that. Let's play e5 straight away. A little more aggressive. Usually I would prepare this move. I haven't castled yet, so it might look odd to open up the center, but black is not too active yet. They have some minor piece play, but I control more space, and again, I'd really like to achieve this move before black plays e5 himself or herself. But as I was saying about New Orleans, you know, aside from the food, there's also a great music scene there. I got to see some live music. Special thanks to my host family, the Tisserand family, who actually invited me down there. I was staying with them for a few days. Took me to some shows in the French Quarter, Frenchman Street. We also walked down Bourbon Street, the classic street in New Orleans, which is a big place for partying. I didn't do too much pure partying, but it was cool to check out. I was a little disappointed because on Decatur Street, if you're at all familiar with New Orleans, there's this famous street chess player. His name is Jude Akers, and I believe he's a USCF National Master. Legendary in New Orleans and around the country, really. He's probably one of the most famous street chess players, I would say, in the world. I think that's fair to say. But he wasn't there on the day or two that I was visiting, unfortunately. I was really looking forward to playing him and maybe recording a game for the channel. So knight h5, this move is unexpected. I guess black's idea is if I play h3, he's going to play knight g3, hitting this rook on h1. That's quite interesting. I mean, my first instinct is that maybe I should just castle right here and then play h3 after that, but black does have ideas of taking on e5, and if I were to take with the f-pawn, maybe taking f3 and winning d4. So I sort of feel like I need my bishop on e3 to support both of these pawns. So I'm strongly considering bishop e3. We also got to look at the line h3, knight g3, h takes g4, knight takes h1, because that knight is far away from home, and if I could trap it somehow, maybe with knight e2, and then go win it with my king, king f1, king g1, I would get 2 matter pieces for the rook. That looks rather unclear, though, and I think my position is good enough where I shouldn't have to resort to that. So I'm liking bishop e3 instead. Black could really make it weird if he plays c5 then. Bishop e3, c5. Somehow I don't think black will do that, but I still have to be prepared for that potential outcome. Bishop e3, c5. And then if d takes c5, he can take here. And then if f takes e5, play bishop takes e5. My knight is pinned. So this pin is causing me some grief right now. h3, knight here. H takes g4, knight takes h1. The principled path, knight e2. Just the thing that bugs me is it takes a solid 2 moves to even threaten the knight. So I don't know what black is going to do in the meantime if I were to play that. I could also play h3, knight g3, rook g1, and just ask that bishop where it's going to move. That's probably not a terrible option. But then again, my king is not castling short anytime soon. What about bishop e3, and if c5, then playing h3? But still this move is occurring, right? So it's not like bishop e3 really solves the knight g3 issue. So that's important to note. Knight e4 possible. That solves the knight g3 problem. So if I play knight e4, I can look to cover g3 and then play h3 next. Knight e4 also lends some support to c5. I think it's still possible on knight e4 that black will play c5. In which case the position gets kind of hairy. You know, I'm going to try this. I haven't fully worked this out, but 8 minutes and 37 seconds. I got to play quicker. It's a nice centralizing move. It also has the ulterior idea of going to f2 if I want to attack the bishop on g4. So c5 is critical. In a longer game, I would probably spend more time thinking about what will happen if black plays c5, but now I'm just kind of trusting that my position is good enough to deal with that should black play it. I think it's the key move for sure. If black takes on e5, by the way, I'm going to take with the d-pawn. If I were to take with the f-pawn, he might have, again, bishop takes f3 and queen takes d4. So let's see what my opponent does. I would say these two moves are critical, c5 or d takes e5. Moves like knight d7, developing moves, I'm not as worried about. They don't interfere with my plan of going h3. Because this knight could be caught napping. If I were to play h3 and we get a swap on f3, then g4 is a legitimate threat, trying to trap that knight on the edge of the board. So it's not like black can just close their eyes and play a couple standard moves here and hope to be fine. I think black has to do something more active than that. The more I look at it, the less I'm worried about taking on e5. I think after d takes e5, I have a nice position. It's hard to harass this knight. The open d file doesn't seem to yield black anything. Maybe black could shoot the queen out to b6 and claim that my king has a hard time getting to the king side. But again, if I'm playing h3 next move, that's not a major concern where my king is going to go yet. So right now, while my opponent is thinking, I want to consider what to do if black does play c5. That's got to be critical. So if c5, let's say d takes c5, and then this misdirection recapture, d takes e5. Then if f takes e5, I think black has at least two good moves there. Either bishop takes e4, e5, or maybe even stronger, knight c6. Looking to develop and also recapture on e5 with the knight. So somehow after c5, I do not like just d takes c5. What about c5, h3? So just continue with our plan. Bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, c takes d4, we have g4. That knight is trapped. Our center is collapsing, and I could see black getting a few pawns for the piece. Maybe knight takes f4, bishop takes f4, d takes e5. That's a very interesting line. I have an extra minor piece there, but black has captured all of my center pawns, d, e, and f pawns. I also have to watch out for f5. I think with white possessing the bishop pair and black maybe being weak on this diagonal, I should be okay in the event of that, but that will be an interesting line to analyze in the postmortem. All right, so I said I'm going to take this way. I'm going to stick with that. I don't see a reason to spend more time debating which way to recapture. I'm definitely going to recapture. So I'm happy with that release of the tension. I was much more worried about black playing c5 and trying to completely sabotage my pawn structure. I don't see anything too scary here. I think this knight may very well be misplaced. Perhaps bishop f5? Well, pawn f5, okay. So that leaves black exposed on this diagonal. That's important to note. My knight is under attack. I could take en passant, but that gives black a reason to recapture with the knight, get it off of the rim there. So knight f2 would be the consistent move if I want to attack the bishop. However, I'm thinking knight e to g5 might be stronger because of the threats of not only knight e6 with the fork on the queen and the rook, but also bishop c4 check. That looks vicious if I were able to get that in. So knight g5. Or bishop check first. Maybe bishop check first. Force king h8, swap the queens, and then play knight g5. What about that option? Then knight f7 is a huge threat. Don't think I'm exactly going to win this knight on h5 anymore with the black pawn protecting the g4 square, but yeah, what about this direct move? Bishop check, king h8, knight eg5. Or sorry, trade queens first, and then knight eg5. That looks pretty destructive and disruptive. Because if I play knight eg5 right away, I wonder if queen d5 is a good way for black to cover not only the a2 g8 diagonal, but also the e6 square. It's kind of a weird move to be afraid of, but the immediate knight eg5 might just run into that. And if I play bishop, queen e2 looking for bishop c4, I guess black has b5. Yeah, black's really going to be struggling against the threat of knight f7. Okay, let's go for this line. It's a straightforward line too. It simplifies the position a little bit, which might be in my favor with me having less time than my opponent. So we're going to swap the queens, bring the knight here. And with the threat of knight f7, possibly knight e6, but this is by far the main threat. I think black is in quite a bit of trouble now. Doesn't have time to take on f3 because I'll just play check. Against almost anything black plays here, I'll have check, followed by some sort of discovery. Yeah, rook f8 might be the only safe move, as black just played, because anywhere else after check and king g8, I'm going to have a devastating discovery. But let's try to put 2 and 2 together here and figure out how we can capitalize. Knight e6 would threaten the rook and also c7, but black can go here. So they're going to cover in that case. Could play the check and then reassess after king here. Just decide what to do then. But I'd like to have something in mind before I embark down that path. Maybe check here and bring the other knight into g5. That's a cool idea. Then I'm threatening h3 as well as knight h6. Ooh, that line looks really fun. Okay, I'm going to go for that. Check. Not going to spend too much time either. Wow, black just sacks the exchange. Okay. So he basically believes me that my knight f7 move was going to do quite a bit of damage. So yeah, this might be, objectively speaking, black's best idea. However, I think this bishop is still in a pretty bad spot. Like maybe knight g5 here. Black is threatening the pawn on f4, and I can't play g3 because I dropped my knight. So maybe knight g5. When the rook was on d8, I had to worry about rook d1 if I ever play knight g5. But now I think I'm clear to play this move, so let's do it. Now we've got this in mind. I'm going to pre-move this move. King there, okay. So now black's threatening to take, followed by king takes f7. Always good to think about the opponent's threat. So I think retreating the bishop somewhere is warranted. Which square, c4 or b3? This is the type of decision I'm not sure it really matters that much. And maybe I should just play something fairly fast so as not to lose time. Just briefly thinking if it makes sense to play h3, but probably not. My bishop is a little more secure on b3. It's defended there. However, black could get the knight up here to c5 maybe and harass it. Nah, I don't think that's a big enough concern. Let's just play this move. So now knight e6 is on the table as well, in addition to the h3 move I was mentioning. And it's worth pointing out that h3 could still be met by knight g3. It's not like knight g3 has gone away. In fact, black would probably have to play knight h3 if I were to play h3 here. Maybe they could play bishop takes g5. Okay, so black is letting my knight survive. Plays knight a6, but letting me do this, which I think I should do. I think I should take that opportunity to play this move. Yeah, let's do it, because not only do we cover f4 again, but when we stop black from taking the knight on g5, when I recapture with the f-pawn, black might have f4 there with the bishop having a retreat square backwards, but now this bishop is just entombed on the g4 square, basically. And now I think the only issue I have to solve is how to trap it, because h3 is very nearly just winning a piece, but again, there is knight g3. So maybe just play king f2 first, followed with h3 next. I don't really see what black does against that. I'm kind of dominating every single one of his pieces. This knight can't go to c7 or c5. I guess he would be forced to play knight g7 if I were to play king f2. Yeah, knight g7 would be the only move, I believe. Really want to play h3, though. h3, just trapping that bishop is so tempting. h3, knight g3, h takes g4, knight takes h1, g5, bishop g7. Man, I'm so close to just outright winning there. But that knight is not quite trapped. It's wriggling free. h3, knight g3. Take, knight takes, g5, bishop g7. And how am I covering g3? Can't, unfortunately. So I think I should just play king f2 or castles or maybe bishop e3 and go from there. I think bishop e3 is pretty sensible. Yeah, let's play that move. Don't see a direct way to trap that bishop. I think he's going to play knight g7 to give himself the h5 square, so let's just play a developing move. Eyes the a7 square, overprotects the c5 square. I only have 2 minutes and 30 seconds left. Rook c8, okay. Okay, so now, again, I'm looking at h3 just because the circumstances have changed a little bit. But still that same issue is going to crop up, the fact that I can't control the g3 square after all is said and done. Could just pick off a pawn here if I really wanted to. Now, let's just play this. So now h3 is definitely a threat. Like, no doubt about that. Could have also considered taking on a7, but I think I like connecting my rooks better. I am up the exchange here. I've got good control of the position. Don't see a real need to rush. c5. Okay, so I think black is a little oblivious to this threat. Otherwise, they would have taken some action against that. So just h3 now. What's the defense? c4, I can always play bishop back to a2, no problem. Yeah, I think h3 is just winning a piece. Let's do it. No squares for this guy. I'll be curious when I play back through this game, looking at the past few moves, if I had something concrete there to win material. Didn't seem like I did, but just based on how black's minor pieces are so bottled up over here, and the fact that the bishop in particular has no square to go to when I attack it with h3, that very nearly made me pull the trigger on h3 earlier, but knight g3 was a persistent issue. So now, if I want to, I can take on g4, he takes on b3, and then I can take on h5. That looks pretty clean. But I can also just drop my bishop back if I wanted to and play it safe. I don't know, though. Take here, take h5. I'm getting my rook involved down the h-file, which is pretty darn attractive. I think I might go for that line because, yeah, it's really straightforward. He can establish a pawn on the second rank, but I have the c1 square covered so many times it scarcely matters. He can also take c2 check, but king f3 is going to cover everything. Not at all worried about losing the b2 pawn with this threat being on the table. His knight is still dominated here. I think on this one I can just play this move. Taking on g6 also looks very, very good. Let's just play knight d4, though. Attack the rook. Attack b3, reinforce c2. It's looking all over. No tricks left for black, really. Take here. Open up the attack on the bishop. King g7. Here I have knight takes f5. Yeah, and since king takes g6 runs into this move even, that looks like lights out. Could also try to calculate a mate with rook takes h6 here. Maybe king f3 threatening g4. But knight takes e7 so obviously wins. Yeah, let's just do that one. Keep it simple, especially if you are at all lacking in time. Just keep it simple. You don't get points for winning in a flashy way or the computer-approved way. Winning is winning, no matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Okay. Yeah, let's just take here. Knight d5 coming. I'm going to play a mean move, just completely shut down his bishop. No bishop takes f4. Go attack his knight. If the knight moves, we have rook d6. And with 2-second increment, well, I was about to say I should not lose on time, but as we saw in the recent Title Tuesday and in my match with Tall Baron, I'm fully capable of losing on time with 2-second increment. Heck, I've lost on time with 30-second increment before, twice. It's happened twice in tournament games. But in this position, I feel pretty good about calling it, especially when I have checkmate. Okay, so we win. Now, as I've mentioned many times before, when you're playing serious games, like standard games online, I would qualify it as a serious game. You don't want to just add in the computer right away. You want to identify some areas in the game where you as a human can go back through and try to identify improvements, or areas where you can address things that you didn't have time to consider during the game. And once you've drawn some conclusions about that, only then add in the engine. That's your final step. So let's talk about the opening. So I played this Austrian Attack f4. This is the principal way of combating the Pirc defense, which black is playing. So we establish 3 pawns right in the center. A very classical response to what black is doing, because we're taking the space that black is not bothering to occupy himself. So f4, bishop g7. And now knight f3 is the normal move, but I played this move a3. It's kind of sneaky, but as I was describing, the idea is to try to discourage black from playing c5. And I don't think, I can't play moves right now in the current situation. So let me actually go to the analysis board, but I'm going to turn off, did not want to see that yet. I don't like that it shows the evaluations. I wanted to move pieces around without being able to see the evaluations, because that affects when you're making your own assessments of the position. But anyways, so a3, the idea is to discourage black from playing c5, because if you play knight f3, you do have to be ready for c5. And the idea after d takes c5 is for black to play this move queen a5 and load up on e4. If white just continues munching pawns, knight takes e4, and black is hitting c3 3 times. So the new in chess approved was in an article called, and I think in the SOS column, they recommended this move, or the author of the article did, because after c5 now, take queen a5, we can play b4 and kick the queen back. By the way, I'm not even completely sure about this. Like, if the queen goes back to d8, this might be playable for black, because knight takes e4 is still a threat. Knight takes e4, bishop a1. Although I suspect white should be doing well here. Maybe you could even play just rook b1. So a3 shuts down black's most active way of playing. I've mostly encountered black castling short now, whereupon we're going to continue kind of like I did in the game. Bishop d3, knight f3, eventually look to play the move e5 and advance in the center. So I was looking forward to doing something like that. But black played c6. I feel like this is a little slow and passive. It does nothing to discourage me from playing e5 in the future. It does open the queen's avenue towards a5, but black never played that anyways. So I got to believe that castling is more flexible here for black. So c6, knight f3, castles, bishop d3, bishop g4. This was my first think of the game, what to do in this position. I went ahead and played e5. I was also thinking about bishop e3 or h3 directly. I think I maybe even thought about castling. But I was worried that if I delayed e5, black was going to play it himself. So let's just say I played bishop e3, for instance. It's not out of the question that black could do this, because after take and take, I can't take with the knight. It's pinned. Pawn takes. Now let's say knight f to d7. And these pawns are weak. And if black manages to play knight takes e5, black will be very satisfied, I think. So I wanted to get in that move before black managed to play e5 himself. And same thing with h3, by the way. I know this would garner me the bishop pair, but I was still a little worried about this. Take, 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 knight f d7, let's say. And again, I'm going to go back through this with the computer, but I want to play through my human thoughts before looking closely at what the engine says. Knight h5 took me by surprise. I wasn't really considering this move. It looks artificial, and to a seasoned player, they're going to be suspicious of the knight on the rim over here. Knights on the rim are grim, as we know. But it does carry with it this persistent threat of knight g3 if I go h3 and try to attack the bishop on g4. And I was looking at so many lines like this where I give the rook in the corner, but it's really annoying to stop black from playing knight g3. Although, looking at this again, knight g3 is not actually a threat here. If I were to just pass, let's just say I play some random move, bishop d2. Black goes here, I can play king f2 now, can't I? And this knight has nowhere to go. All these squares are covered. And so is h1. So I wonder if I could even start making my way over here with my king. It still feels very slow, though. This is a hard line to commit to if you're white, because you're sacrificing an exchange, and you're banking on winning more material back, even though it'll take a couple moves. But there are scenarios like this, oftentimes when you allow a fork on a king and a rook, and your opponent's knight ends up in the corner, where you just kind of trust that you're going to win that knight. But I wasn't sure here, and my position seemed good, so I didn't want to take the risk. So I played knight e4, trying to cover the g3 square and threaten this move. Now, I really think that black's game slides downhill after their next decision, taking on e5. I was happy to see that move. I would have been more concerned about black just completely laying waste to my pawn structure and playing c5 and pursuing a scorched earth policy in the center. Just invite mayhem in the middle of the board. Because now if I play h3, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, there's this tension. And black might even just pitch the piece on h5. He might even say, you know what, I know you're threatening g4, but I don't care. I'm just going to grab this pawn, and then after g4, I'm going to grab e5. I guess maybe I could play this move, though. I think I was... Wait, what was I considering? I was considering some line where black ends up taking on f4. Here... Somehow I thought about this position, but in a slightly different fashion? I don't know. So maybe c5 isn't as good as I thought it might be in the game. Because h3 seems like an effective reply, doesn't it? Take, and g4 is coming really fast. Maybe I was hallucinating, but I thought black could get at least 2 or 3 pawns for the piece in this case. But that may not be the case after g4. I wonder if after h3, bishop f5 is playable for black. And if g4 take here, and after bishop takes, again, this g3 square comes in handy, forking the rook and the knight, the rook and the bishop. The position's volatile, that's for sure. I still think there's some way I can exploit this knight out here, but I constantly have to worry about black taking my center pawns. Okay, so that'll be something to check with the engine. But after d takes e5, d takes e5, it felt like my position was more secure. I didn't have to worry about black playing c5 and hitting the pawn on d4. And it almost felt like I was just left to my own devices now. I could play h3 as I intended to do. But maybe black's next move is the real culprit. Again, I hate to see the computer suggestion right now. But if f6... Yeah, f6 looks a lot stronger than what black did in the game. Because after f5, again, black cannot take advantage of the tension because there is no pawn tension if I move my knight away. But with f6, black might force me to address the tension between the e5 and the f6 pawns. They still weaken this diagonal, so maybe I'm still better somehow. But yeah, f6 looks like the better move than f5. So it very well could be the case that d takes e5 is all right, but black has to play f6 after that. Once this move gets played, I'm pretty happy with the rest of the game. Unless there's some way I could have won a piece later on, we'll see. But check. If I played knight eg5 right away, this threatens bishop c4 and also knight e6, but I wasn't sure what to do against queen d5, trying to cover both of those squares. And if queen e2, looking at bishop c4, there's b5. And black's barely holding. So I just changed up the move order. Check first, force the king away, trade, knight g5, and knight f7 is a deadly threat. That'll be terminal if black allows it in the current position. So I think black played the only safe rook move. If the rook goes to e8 or c8, because black can't stop knight f7. So if the rook goes to e8 or c8, then I'm going to have the check followed by the discovery. Discovered attack on the king, and I'll pick up the rook, whether it's here or here. g8's out of the question. That just gets mated with knight f7 directly. So maybe rook d7 is playable, although it looks weird. But rook f8 seems like the best attempt, at least. And now I decided to go for check here. And the idea was if king g8, I was going to jump this other knight in. Play knight 3 to g5. And not even do any discoveries yet. This is the threat is the stronger than the execution technique. I've got all these discoveries with the knight, but none of them is deadly. I can't even pick up a pawn. I guess I could play check and knight takes b7 maybe. But bringing this other knight into the action, well, this could cause some serious concern because now, let's just say black does something. I don't know, knight a6. I can check, double check here, and now check here, whereupon black would be forced to give the exchange because the g8 square is covered. So adding that other knight into the position should open up several possibilities for me. I also stopped black from playing bishop takes f3. So now h3 is again a major concern for black because the bishop has no safe squares and they can't just take my knight when I play that move. So black probably made the right call here playing rook takes f7. Everything else looks really bad. So bishop takes f7, bishop here, and I played knight g5. Just not sure I played this completely correct. I guess we'll find out. Like, black was kind of in hurry-up mode now. I think they considered this position to be lost, and we're just playing pretty quick because black never addressed my eventual threat of h3. Here, black could think about something like take, and then f4, just to ensure that this bishop can always drop back safely. And they're a lot worse, but they're fighting. I mean, probably I'll go after this f-pawn next. Maybe castle and play bishop here. Bishop takes f4. But king g7, on the other hand, doesn't seem right. I get to retreat my bishop, and especially allowing knight e6 check seems like a mistake. I believe black basically has to play bishop takes g5 now. Take, and then, again, maybe do this. Because when black just develops and I'm allowed to sink the knight in, knight e6 check, king back here, I'm just dominating their knight on a6. Can't go to either of these squares. And again, these pieces are all gummed up. No place to go. Rook g1. Yeah, so here's where I was considering how to try to win the bishop. And I didn't manage to solve that problem. So if I play h3 directly, then black will play knight g3, attacking my rook. And if I just move the rook, like now play rook g1, then black can go here with the bishop, and they have knight e4 check if necessary. Although if this knight moves, then there might be g4. But the problem, I think, is if I attack it with the king, knight e4 comes with check. I don't quite get time to do g4. I'm sure this position is still pretty good for white, but... And also after knight g3, if I take, at first sight, this looked kind of good. Play g5, force the bishop back to like g7 or f8, and then try to corral this knight. But even here, I have trouble covering the g3 square. Black's playing this move next almost no matter what. And even though my pieces are so much better than black's, I'm not immediately winning as I would like. So I eventually just decided to play bishop e3, connect my king and my rook on the queen side. Yeah, and I think black has to try to trade off this knight on e6. So knight g7 seems mandatory. Yeah, and after take, let's say bishop takes. Again, at least this bishop has the h5 square in this case. Even that might be a concern if I'm ever able to organize g4, but black still has life. So bishop e3, black played rook c8, and these next couple moves were not good. I mean, I know the position is almost certainly lost for black, but rook c8 followed by c5 did nothing to address the main problem. So now I played king f2, just covering g3. Black plays c5, and once I get this move in, black is at the very least losing a minor piece, and it's all downhill after that. c4. I played h takes g4. Could also play bishop a2, I think, but this seemed easy. Get a 2 for 1, 2 minor pieces for 1. And black can take c2 either way, but if pawn takes, I've got c1 covered 3 times. I could probably just play this move and go attack the bishop. Black is crushed. So no concerns here whatsoever. And the rest of the game was me just cleaning up, basically. It's completely over. Okay, so I know you were probably seeing the computer evaluations over here. Sorry about that. But let's just check a few things now that we've gone through the game once. So here the engine does not like e5. Says that wasn't a great move by me. It doesn't completely relinquish the advantage, but I'm better off just playing h3 directly. So let's investigate this line. h3, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, and now e5. This is what I was concerned about. I'm going to turn on the local analysis. So take. I'm sorry that this is cut off a little bit on the side. Take, and now f5. Yeah, I could play this way, couldn't I? I've done this before. I should remember this. I have when I've encountered e5, I've taken with the d pawn and then pushed past with the f pawn, f5, keeping things more closed. That does look pretty good. Sometimes you might even follow with g4. Because I think this other way, which I was analyzing, is probably not as good. Yeah, if I were to take this way, knight f7, this pawn's a goner, and white is not better. So maybe that is a good argument for playing h3. Instead, I went with this more forcing move, e5. The computer really hates knight h5. It says that's a mistake by black. So instead, take. I probably would have taken this way. I think I like taking this way now because I gain a tempo on the knight. I know in the game, when black took on e5, I took with a d-pawn, which might still be good, but is there something wrong with this? Take. Knight here. I was looking at this line. Again, black attacking the center with f6. Yeah, that's a theme that I think you're seeing in this game, is that black can't let me sit around with these center pawns. He has to try at every turn to take down my center, create counterplay against it, because if he doesn't, he might just get crushed. That space advantage is a huge asset to white. Okay, so that's a nice line. So knight h5, how do I punish this? I played knight e4 after thinking for a while. The computer likes h3. So h3, knight here, take, knight takes. Ah, yeah, okay. So that's what I was missing, just king e2 here. Wow. Yeah, king e2, threatening the knight. And I didn't catch this in my first time through with the postmortem either. I did say to myself that, I was looking at this afterwards, that knight g3 is not actually a threat. But I didn't connect that to the fact that I can just play king e2. I was only looking at king f1. Allow the check, but then king f2, and it's the same position. The knight has nowhere to go. Black's going to lose that. Okie doke. So that's a useful device to keep in mind. So in that case, if black can't successfully respond with knight g3 and they're just going to lose 2 minor pieces for the rook, that is certainly grounds for playing this for white. So knight e4, on the other hand, decent. I still have a slim advantage, but yeah, h3 was more direct. And now take on e5. So the computer likes f6 here. What about c5? c5, h3, as I was analyzing, take, queen takes. And now, instead of c takes d4, which would just allow g4, knight c6, the computer wants to play. g4 principled, knight takes d4, hitting the queen. Queen here, take here. And this is kind of one of these chaotic lines I was referencing, where black might just sack the knight and try to get counterplay elsewhere. Black has dismantled my center. c4 attacking the bishop. I assume if I take, I'm going to run into this with pressure against d3 and also c2. And weird stuff is happening that the computer seems to think is good for black. Knight b3 is a really nice move, isn't it? And if take, there's queen takes. My king is stuck in the center. The knight's weak. Yeah, this position's a mess, and probably not in my favor. Okay, so I think my instincts about c5 were correct. Like, that's definitely a move that could cause some chaos, and I could see one or both of us easily going wrong if we were to get into such a mess. h3, take, take. Black would have to play accurately here, though. Like, knight c6 is a nice move in view of the big threat of g4. Instead, though, my opponent took on e5, and I get to take with the d-pawn. once more, if f takes, there is bishop takes f3 followed by queen takes d4. So I didn't want to go into that. And I think this position is absolutely critical because I was very harsh on black after f5. And yeah, as you can see, the eval just shoots up after that move from a little less than a half pawn advantage to white to a decisive advantage, getting up towards +3 territory. So that tells you pretty much everything you need to know about f5 versus f6. f6 is much better because the bishop has the ability to retreat for one thing, but also it's going to force a clash between these pawns. Again, black has to think about dismantling the pawn structure. If you're going to play the Pirc as black and white goes for such an aggressive line, like, you got to be thinking how you can sabotage that pawn structure. And f5 didn't do it. f5 attacked the knight, but nothing else. And so best here, if f6 were played, is bishop c4 check, king h8, trade the queens again, so a similar line. And now take on f6 maybe, or knight c5 the computer seems to like here. Yeah, this is a lot less clear. I mean, for one thing, h3 is not nearly as big a threat as it was in the game. So f5, and let's see how I played it after this, whether it's computer approved or not. So bishop c4 check, the engine likes, trading the queens. Yep, knight here, rook f8, best move for black. And here the engine likes knight d4 instead of what I did, but I bet what I did is still pretty good. It prefers knight d4 by a full pawn, though, a full point. So moving the knight away is an integral part of this plan to stop black from playing bishop takes f3, and yeah, maybe with knight e6 being a threat too, along with knight f7, black is just busted. Yeah, I agree with that. With this, black also is in bad shape, but at least they get to give up the exchange directly and in a better way. And now their best bet is to take on f3, which kind of secures the knight here, and then play knight d7. Yeah, and I'll have a hard time attacking this knight. I'd probably just continue with normal moves now, like bishop e3, maybe castle queenside. So still very good for black, for white. But black is hanging on. Instead, bishop h6. Likes knight g5. All right, that's good to see. Yeah, king g7 didn't do black any favors. Knight d7 is better. Just trying to get the knight out straight away. Bishop all the way back to a2 is best here. Interestingly, I didn't even consider that move. I was just looking at bishop c4, bishop b3. Okay, so here, check is fine, king h8. And now I saw when I was going through this the first time that the computer was liking rook g1. And based on some of the lines I was playing through, this makes perfect sense now. Because you know what the difference is? With rook g1, this looks like a dumb move. Like, it's not a move you would play every day. Put the rook behind the pawn. Usually that's a bad idea because you're telegraphing your intentions. You would only move your rook there if you intended to move the pawn. But in the context of how I'm trying to trap this bishop, it is crystal clear why this move is good. And it's because after h3, there would be no knight g3 now because there's no rook to attack on h1. So if black plays knight g7, then, let me turn this off just not to spoil it. And if you want to figure this out on your own, feel free to pause the video. How does white win a piece here? So the solution is just trade, I think the solution. And then after black takes, h3 here. And now with the rook on g1, we're propping up g4. And that bishop is trapped. Wish I could have found that. That would have been a nifty variation to play out in the game. Rook g1. I think this is a case where your chess instincts do you a disservice because I know from playing a lot of chess that usually you don't want to put rooks directly behind pawns like that unless you're very certain the pawns are going to move forward. It's just like an unusual move that's usually bad. So I didn't even really think about that move. I thought a lot more about king f2 or castles because those are more constructive moves. Like castles gets my king to safety, gets the rook more towards the center. King f2 would eventually connect the rooks. Didn't think about rook g1. So bishop e3 gets the question mark here from the engine. We're still totally winning, plus 4.5, but yeah, rook g1 was better. Yeah, now with rook c8, again, black has to bail out at this point. Knight g7 is mandatory. Got to give that bishop room to retreat. I could even still try something like this, followed by h3, rook here, and go for g4. I wonder how that would turn out. Bishop takes. Let's just say I try that. H3 here, rook here. Yeah, black might be forced to play G5. That's right. Give the bishop an escape square. So rook C8, king F2. And now with G3 covered, we're all geared up for H3. Again, knight G7 has to be played, even though white's +5 at this point. And that evaluation, +5, by the way, I think is, well, I don't know. It might be because this bishop is still kind of doomed, but perhaps in view of the eventual threat of G4, black will have to play G5, and they'll lose even more material. So even though black is only down 2 points of material right now, that's probably a reflection that black is going to have to give up more material. Yeah, rook AG1 now. Interesting. And this move is still on the table. Yeah, that bishop might just be lost. We're close to it. G5 and take, and now this bishop is in trouble too. If black takes here, we can take here, and 2 pieces under attack. So it's hopeless regardless, but yeah, rook G1 earlier, a couple moves ago, would have been nice. Yeah, and you saw the rest. I don't think there's too much else to deconstruct after this. Just a clean up process. Okay, so I can recommend this A3 line from time to time if you're an E4 player and you're looking for a weapon against the Pircs. Chances are your opponent will not be familiar with this unless they watch my channel and have seen this video. So it's a good alternative to the more normal move, knight F3 in this position. So some interesting tactics and decisions in this one. Kind of skeptical of the way black handled it, knight H5, but they might have been able to make it work, but I think they have to keep in mind that it's necessary to attack my center at every turn. When black plays F5 and there's no pawn tension anymore, that's where black's position went downhill. Oh yeah, and for the record, in this one, you guys can barely see it down here, but I had a 17 average centipawn loss. My opponent had a 45 average centipawn loss, 5 inaccuracies, 6 mistakes, 0 blunders. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I'll be back again soon with another video. Talk to you later. Bye.